Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 347 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here tonight with our guest, Nick Adams. Nick served as an intelligence officer in the Army, both conventional forces and also with a special mission unit. Multiple deployments to Afghanistan and elsewhere. We're really excited to have you on the show today, Nick. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Pleasure to be on.
So, man, let's jump into it. The first question for most of our guests about your origin story. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how that kind of took you towards the Army.
Yeah, no, and I actually love that that's the first question because I love origin stories, right? Because everyone's got a different story and they're actually fascinating because everyone's just got different perspectives.
Yeah.
So mine kicked off. I was more or less born into it. They say the Army's a family business, I guess, in some ways. And so I'm no different in that regard. My dad was an Army NCO, a mechanic, and he was stationed in Germany and a number of other places. So I was actually born over in Germany when he was stationed there. And so I grew up as an Army brat, as they say, right? Moving kind of from town to town and started in Europe. Spent some time in California, Texas, Belgium, and then finally ended up in Idaho around 8th grade. And that's when my dad decided to retire. But by that time, I mean, I'd grown up playing Army, right? Because that's what kids do. And I remember at some point saying, like, I think I want to do this when I grow up. I think I want to join the Army. And like any other good Army person, my dad said, you should probably think about joining the Air Force instead. We had that conversation, and for a while I was like, yeah, okay. But then, I being who I am and who I was like, nah, I think the Army might be it. And so it was always something that I think as a kid I gravitated toward. I thought it was, obviously, thought my dad was the coolest guy ever. Still think he's pretty awesome. And so, that really had an impact on me. But I think, the lifestyle was great too. And as a kid, I think at the time you don't necessarily appreciate moving and leaving your friends. But I think later on as an adult, you're like, you know what? I saw a lot of the world at a pretty young age. I think I want to keep this going. But what profoundly changed, I think, my conviction to join was 9/11. That's when it kind of went from, hey, this might be something cool to go do. And man, it's really awesome seeing seeing the world and getting paid to live in Europe. I was a senior in high school when the planes hit the World Trade Center. And, like most people, I remember waking up that morning. I was out in Mountain Time, so, it was pretty early, getting ready for school. And, one of my friends calls me. He's like, hey, man, turn on the TV. A plane just hit the World Trade Center. And I was like, okay, sure it was an accident. And these things happen, I guess. But I at no point in that first moment did I think this was a terrorist attack. And then this is before I think I didn't have a cell phone at this point. I mean, this is like 2001. I'm driving to school, and by the time I got there, the second plane had hit. And then, by that time, things were kind of totally chaotic. And then a lot of rumors. I mean, I'm sure you remember 9/11. People didn't really know what was what and what got hit and what was our response going to be. So, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I've always considered joining, and now we're under attack. And so now I was like, okay, I'm 100%. Signing somewhere, right? And so I was ready to go right away. My parents talked some sense into me and said, look, this war is not going to end overnight. You should really think about, going to school, going the ROTC route. I ended up meeting them halfway. I enlisted in the reserve at 17 under the delayed entry program. So senior in high school, 17 years old, went to, had to beg my mom to sign the paperwork. But there I was, signed up and raised my right hand December 2001 and enlisted in the reserve. And from there, I actually ended up getting picked up for an ROTC scholarship at Boise State University. And I commissioned in 2006. So, So that's kind of when I actually got into the fight, so to speak. That the way that worked was once I got my ROTC contract, the reserves essentially let me go do that. And so I went to school for the first kind of 4 years of the GWAT, and then in 06 commissioned at that point.
Was there some inkling in the back of your mind of what you wanted to do in the Army, if you wanted to be a pilot, or what was it always intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wasn't really sure, but I remember having this conversation with my parents, and they, my dad actually said to me like, "Hey, you like, to." At the time, I was really into Command and Conquer. Was like a really big. I might remember this computer game, right?
You and I are the same age. Senior year of high school is 9/11.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. So you know what I mean. I loved playing that. I loved strategizing. I loved sending the little spy plane out and seeing where the bad guys were, so I could get a jump on them, that sort of thing.
I was the guy that liked the Tanya units. That's why I ended up in.
Yeah. No, I love it. Those are great. Tanya. Yeah. That was great. So anyway, all to say, like I thought about it and I was like, I think Intel would be kind of a cool field to get into, to have all these things, to kind of paint the picture, right? Like what is the enemy doing? And keeping your guys obviously alive and bringing the pain to the enemy. Like that was kind of the thought process. And I kicked around a couple different ideas. At some point I wanted to go infantry. At some point I wanted to go artillery. At some point I thought logistics would be cool because what you might be able to do after you get out. But for me, I was like, where can I have the most impact? Where can I apply my talents the best? And I just kind of had that thought and was like, I think Intel is probably where I want to be. And so when I was in ROTC, I actually got the opportunity my last year to sign. I could either sign for branch or for duty assignment. And they kind of dangle you with this additional 3 years, right? Where they're like, you're signing up for 4, but if you do 3 more, we can get you either your duty assignment of choice or your branch. And so I signed for branch, and I signed for MI, for military intelligence. And I threw in I'll still put Germany as my top duty assignment because maybe I'll get it. And I did. I kind of got lucky. I got 2 for the price of 1. So awesome. I signed for the additional 3, served, had a 7-year active duty obligation, but got both branch and duty assignment of choice. So it kind of worked out.
So ROTC, did you have to go to the basic course and then your officer or intelligence branch? I mean, I have no idea. I wasn't an officer. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, they changed it a little bit. And I think it's changed a few times even since 06. Yeah, so at that point, they had this thing called Basic Officer Leaders Course 2, which basically they took OBC, which was the officer basic course, and they broke it up into 2 different things. I think it's back to 1 thing now. I'm not 100% sure, but at that time, I commissioned in May, and then I went out and did Bullet 2 at the time at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and that was your basic soldier FM 7-8 stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like movement to contact, convoy ops, patrols, op orders, all the things you did as a cadet anyway, through our ROTC. And then now you're okay, it's real now. I mean, still training, but now you're actually commissioned. Now you're expected to know what you're doing. And that was, I think, 6 weeks. And then from there, I went to Fort Huachuca for the officer basic course for MI. And that was, I think, about between 4 and 6 months somewhere. That was great. And a lot of people complain about Fort Huachuca. I got to say, Arizona is a pretty awesome place to be. Especially down there. I mean, there's some cool towns around there. There's Bisbee, there's Tombstone. Tombstone's is cool. Who doesn't want to go check that out? So in terms of places to go see, it was a cool place. And the training itself, I think, was good too. Interestingly, in 06, there was still a lot of, we were still doing the high intensity conflict stuff. And at the time, everybody was like, we don't need this anymore. We have to do counterinsurgency. This is the only thing that we're going to be doing in the future. The battlefields are going to be in cities. And it's interesting now, almost 20 years later, how much we're kind of back to what we, basically training for high intensity conflict again. Yeah. And how it's come full circle. But at the time, the shift was obviously toward counterterrorism and counterinsurgency.
Hey guys, our show is sponsored by GhostBed. Check them out, please. They make awesome mattresses, awesome pillows, awesome bedding. GhostBed provides high quality and super comfortable award-winning mattresses crafted in the US and Canada. Did you know that 60% of US adults report being too hot when they're trying to sleep? That's me. I'm a sweaty little baby. That's why we designed all of our products with cooling features so you stay comfortable and asleep all night long. Pair any of our mattresses with GhostBed's award-winning adjustable base and get the ultimate sleep experience. GhostBed rules the family-owned business, 60,000 plus 5-star reviews. They have sleep experts on staff with 20 plus years of experience. So if you have any questions, you can hit them up and ask them, maybe what kind of mattresses work for you. 20 plus year warranty. That's 2 times the industry standard. Free shipping and returns on mattresses. Most of the products ship out within 24 hours. They have in-house customer support and sleep experts chilling in Plantation, Florida. It rules. It's the best. They give you 101 nights risk-free to make sure that these beds are right for you. If you don't like it after 101 nights, you can send it back, full refund. When you purchase a GhostBed mattress, your comfort guaranteed. I'm reading it right now, and it's capital letters, guaranteed. Okay? They do the right thing, and they're a great company. If you're not sure which GhostBed's right for you, like I said before, you could take their mattress quiz online, or you can give a call to one of their sleep experts, and they'll help you with exactly what you possibly could need, what works for you and what doesn't. And the best news about this is, Team House listeners and viewers, you get an extra 10% off site-wide for a limited time. You just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the code HOUSE at checkout. One more time, that's ghostbed.com/house with the code HOUSE, HOUSE, at checkout for an extra 10% off site-wide. I want to thank GhostBed for their continued support. I want to thank all the fans that listen and watch for their continued support. Without you guys, we are nothing. So thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for supporting the companies that help support the show. ghostbed.com/house for 10% off. Made in the US, made in Canada. Shout out to our brothers in Canada. They rock. Check them out. I love GhostBed. Thanks, guys.
Do you want to explain a little bit about like the job of an Army intelligence officer? Because it's different than maybe some of the other roles out there. Like, at least I imagine they're not training you in like tradecraft. That's not really an intelligence officer's job per se, at least not at this point, right?
That's right.
What do they actually do in the military?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think at some point, like when I was like, oh, military intelligence, this sounds cool. It's like James Bond. And then you get there and it's not James Bond at all. Back my first unit, I was in a military intelligence unit, and I was the XO of a company. And so like all I did really was like supply and logistics and like
personnel
checking readiness. Exactly, right. Which is great. And then we can get into that. But the training, I mean, again, it was, essentially, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was like really understanding what it is the enemy is doing, and being the person that knows how the enemy is going to employ his forces.
Analysis.
And so in a high intensity conflict scenario, you have to know the enemy's weapon systems. You have to know the enemy's doctrine. And if you're going up against an adversary, it's your job to know he'll probably use, these breachers to get through this obstacle. He's got a reserve element he's probably going to put over here. And so you get trained in like that, military decision-making process, and understanding how to, employ your sensors to like find where he is. So that's ISR. That is human intelligence, it's signals intelligence. It's putting together all of the different intelligence disciplines to really paint a picture. And then it's understanding what it means, right? It's one thing to have all these collectors give you information, but if your analysts and your intelligence officers don't understand what it means, then you can't provide the most valuable piece to the commander, which is the so what, which is, why do I care that he's got 50 tanks? Why do I care that, to go to a counterinsurgency example, like, why do I care that he drives a white Toyota Corolla and lives, on this street corner? Like, those are things that, like, as the intelligence professional, you have to spend some time understanding what that means and what the significance of that is, and then being able to understand, like when patterns shift and why that matters. And so, yeah, to your point, it's not tradecraft, right? Like, intelligence officers in the Army are not being, told to meet with some dude in some bar in Vienna. Like, that's not what we do. It's a whole lot of, hey, we've got this mission, and we have to, what is the enemy going to do? What can we expect? What are his most likely and most dangerous courses of action? And being able to brief the commander and at the team level or at the at the platoon level, like the soldiers that are going out, like what they can expect to be up against.
So tell us about your first unit. You said XO in a conventional MI unit.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like my whole career, I've heard, just wait till you get to the real Army because things are different there. And I think what people meant with that was like the brigade combat team. That was the big thing in 2006. From I think like 2003 onward maybe. And so that was it, right? It was like that when you get there, things will be different. But like here, where I started out in Germany at a theater level military intelligence brigade, it was very much not that. We were not a combat arms unit. There were no combat arms soldiers around. It was a lot of intel personnel, and in 2006 at the time, like there wasn't much happening in Europe. It was pretty sleepy, right? And so like my first thought when I got there was like, okay, when are we deploying? Like when are we supporting Afghanistan and Iraq? And this was 2006, right? So there's 2 wars going on. And I didn't pick Germany to stay in Germany. I mean, of course I wanted to get back there. I was born there. I've got a lot of family there. And so I was excited to go back, but I also knew in 2006, like that, I didn't want to camp out. And so when I got there, I was actually initially a little disappointed, I guess, that it was, a headquarters unit of an intelligence brigade. It was actually an intelligence group at the time. But like at the same time, I was like, okay, there's opportunity to learn here, right? Like I'm going to learn how logistics works. I'm going to learn how personnel works. And as an executive officer of a headquarters company, like you're doing a lot of that. And so got to run my first range. I mean, those are all things you pick up and like things to learn. So in terms of places to be, it actually turned out pretty good. And I had a really good commander and first sergeant. And what I'll tell any lieutenant that listens to this is like, listen to your first sergeant and listen to those NCOs. And that's what my dad told me going in as a former NCO. He was like, listen, those guys can make or break your career. So just go in, keep your mouth shut and your ears open for the first little while, and you're going to do just fine.
Sound advice.
Yeah, absolutely. It served me well.
Okay, so how long were you at that unit?
So I was there for a year, and like I said, it was a good learning experience. Got to run some ranges, got to learn how the Army works, and then about a year in, actually about 6 months in, I tried to figure out, okay, I'm not deploying here. Like I'm going to be doing this for the next 3 years foreseeably. How can I deploy? How can I get into the fight? And so at some point, I through the, I guess, Lieutenant Mafia, I heard, well, there's a unit that's getting chopped to us. They were coming, I think before they were like the 323rd MI battalion, but they're coming to 66th MI group, which is where I was. And I was like, okay, well, this is a good opportunity maybe to go there. They were an aerial exploitation company. So they had a combination of fixed wing aircraft that were manned. And then they had a couple of Hunter UAVs at the time, which at that time were a program of record. Not cool, fancy SATCOM stuff, right? Like I'm not talking Reapers, but still like UAVs that were going over there. And so this unit had just gotten back from Balad from a year-long rotation, and so I started making some phone calls. Of course, like no top cover, right? I didn't go to my commander and was like, "Hey, sir, can I get to this unit?" I was like, "I'm just going to start calling the S1, seeing what I can make happen here." So I figured out that like there was this unit's coming over. They're going to look for a platoon leader. There's a lieutenant coming from the States to replace me. But then I was like, but why should they send, why should that person go over there? Like I should go to this unit. Like I would like to go do that. And I'm already here. I've paid my dues, right? I've been an XO.
You do need to get your platoon time in, don't you?
It's interesting. Like you don't have to. And at that point, as an intel guy, like especially from lieutenant to captain, it was pretty much guaranteed. Like the promotion rates, I think it started out 4 years. It went down to 3 at some point when I was there. From commissioning to captain was like a 36-month timeline, and that was down from like the 4 years that it had been before. So, but yeah, 100%. I wanted to get platoon time, right? Like as a lieutenant, like you want to be with soldiers, like you don't want to be stuck at headquarters the whole time. And so this unit was going out to Hohenfels, Germany, which anyone who's been to Germany and like here's Hohenfels, they think like that's like the box, like that's where all the units get trained. Nobody wants to go there, but I was like, okay, but as a tenant unit, like I get to go to this really cool base in southern Germany. Like it's beautiful countryside out there. I drove a Dodge Ram too, which up in like the Frankfurt area wasn't a great vehicle choice, as it turns out, because parking is pretty horrible. But I ended up like working it out, and they just cut me orders. And then at some point I did tell my boss, I was like, hey, sir, by the way, like you're losing me anyway, but I'm going to try to line up a transfer. And he was like, hey, I support it. Why don't you come tell me next time before you start pulling levers? But I had a really good instructor in OBC, and she told every one of us, she was like, you got to manage your own career, because if you let other people manage your career, you're going to get stuck doing all kinds of stuff, and other people are going to get the assignments you want. I took that to heart, by the way. And so I started making the calls, and I just figured it was like probably better to lean forward and, see what I can get. And then the whole like ask for forgiveness rather than permission sort of thing. And in that case, it worked out. So I got orders to go down to Hohenfels from the Frankfurt area, and it was a great move. I was with a aerial exploitation battalion. I was a platoon leader of the recon platoon. Like, it sounded cool. I had soldiers, we had airplanes. And then like a couple months later, we got orders to Afghanistan. And so I was pumped, right? I was like 23, 24. I was like, okay, like this is why I'm here. Like, this is why in September of 2001, I got raised my right hand. It wasn't to like, sit at a garrison. And so that kind of started, I guess, that next phase of my career, which is kind of when the deployment started. And that was a really cool unit. I mean, it was a fun place to be. And again, like it was still Germany. So like it was a cool place to be stationed, but then it was like a really cool opportunity to actually get out and deploy with those guys.
So tell us about the aerial exploitation unit and, what you guys were up to when you got deployed to Afghanistan.
Sure. Yeah. So I think this was like mid or early 2008. And we started looking at like where we were going to deploy to. They weren't quite sure. They did a couple site surveys. So I didn't get to go on those trips, but our company commander went out there and like they looked at a few different airfields. What they needed for that aircraft at the time, I don't even think we use them anymore, but they were line of sight aircraft. So they were tethered to a ground control station. And but they could carry like an FMV payload, so full motion video payload. They could carry a signals intelligence payload, and so at that time it was a pretty advanced piece of equipment, right? Like now drones are everywhere, and we should get into that at some point because it's crazy how the battlefield's changed. But in 2008, like we were the only people with drones. Like we were the only ones with anything that flew really of any consequence, and so they were looking for a place to put us. We ended up going to Jalalabad Airfield out in eastern Afghanistan. And so the very first deployment of that unit was like I said, like early 2008. And then my first deployment ended up being in July of 2008. And so, we'd already had established a forward presence. And so the good thing is like, we did all the stuff back home. We packed everything up, shipped it out. I stayed back with the kind of main, really like most of the unit. And what we did was kind of an unorthodox way of doing business. Like we didn't deploy like as a company. We deployed a detachment forward, which essentially was being led at that time by our company commander. But then we like kept people in, and we just always would cycle people forward, right? And so we'd have an officer out there as the OIC, we'd have an NCOIC, and then we'd have about 15 soldiers, and then we'd have about 15 contractors from Northrop Grumman who were like keeping the aircraft safe and like maintained. And so we had a combination of like maintenance soldiers and recon soldiers, and then we would go out there and just like do deployments. And so mine started in July of 2008. And, like most people, like when you first show up over there, you're like, what did I get myself into? Like, what is this place? But it was, again, like it was, I mean, it got real, right? Like that was kind of when you realized like, okay, like we're here, we got a job to do. It was a pretty cool deployment. We started out doing a lot of support for conventional forces. And so most of it was doing like route clearance scans, right? So we'd put the bird up, we'd fly for, 8 hours, however long we had loiter time, and we would just drive up and down routes basically. But we kind of figured out like that wasn't necessarily the best use of that asset because, what are the chances of you catching somebody and placing an IED? I mean, it's not, like you have to, it's a soda straw, right? So it's like right place, right time sort of thing. And I'm not sure that it ever actually happened. And so at some point later that year, we had a Siege of SOTF unit on our compound. So I think it was fifth group guys. I'm not exactly sure at like what group it was, but I know that one of the guard groups ended up switching out with them. All to say, like, they were like, hey, you guys have a SIGINT pod. Like, we're trying to like find like bad dudes. Like, can you guys help us out with that? So this, now we're like, yes, like we should try to figure out this relationship. And so again, it was a kind of a series of like, you know, phone calls and like MOUs. And then we ended up getting like
manage your career.
Them. Yeah, it was, I mean, it really was. It was like, it's almost, it was like entrepreneurial, right? And this wasn't all my idea, by the way. Like one of our like warrants was like, hey man, we should try to work with these guys. Like, I think it'd be a way better use of the asset. And I was like, totally, let's do it. And so, you know, we worked with our like theater 2 and everybody else. Like, let's get chopped to these SF dudes, which, let's be real, they're cool. And as an intel guy, you want to work with cool guys. You don't necessarily want to fly up and down a route, especially if you feel like it's not yielding anything, right? Like if we were keeping guys safe in firefights, like 100%, that would have been a different story.
You
right?
wanted to find a way to contribute to the fight.
Absolutely, right? Like, let's get this asset in there. Let's help these guys out. And so we got chopped over. It was funny too. It was like totally different. Like it was like a night and day difference, right? From like working with the conventional guys, and then suddenly, we actually got an MOU. So like we were chopped over to this, you know, shadowy organization, shall we say, at the time, right? Some guy in a SEAL Navy SEAL uniform, because I had nothing on him, right? And so at the time, I'm just like blown away by this. I'm like, whoa, who's this cool guy? And he's got no name tag, and he calls himself Joe, and who the hell knows if that's his real name? But like, you know, we're just like, yeah, and so we love it because it's awesome, and they're giving us real cool work to do, and we're doing some pretty good target development for those guys.
Cool.
And then, yeah, so that was that, and then, yeah, kind of throughout, like between them and like the Siege of Sodif guys, kind of went back and forth, kind of supporting them, and then we were able to enable a couple of actual HVT kind of raids, and putting guys on target, and it led to, in fact, one of them made CNN, which was kind of wild because I was like, okay, we're like this little hunter unit out here in Eastern Afghanistan. But like at the time, like we ended up thwarting this like attack on the governor of the province, and because they had some intel that like, you know, they're some dudes are planning an attack, and so, you know, we did what we did with our equipment, and we ended up figuring out where they were, and they hit the house, and it was kind of a big deal like for that at the time, right? And so like that to me was just like one of those eye-opening experiences where I was like, man, okay, this is pretty cool. Like we're able to directly impact the fight. We're supporting people who know how to use us effectively. And we may have just changed the like outcome of the war in our sector, right? And so that's kind of where I got like the bug, right? Where I was like, okay, I kind of want to do this special operations thing. I kind of want to like stay in this fight. Like, you know, they're able to get things quickly. The approvals don't take very long. And we're having strategic level impacts with tactical systems. Like how do I keep doing that? So that was kind of my first kind of, you know, look into that world, and kind of wanted to stay.
Just from a reconnaissance point of view, I imagine that, what are we in 2008? The technology around these drones was still sort of nascent. Was it difficult to use the video systems or other ints that are on these platforms? I mean, what were sort of the technical limitations that you guys found yourselves running into? Like, man, I wish we had 3 more hours of time of flight or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like what the most frustrating thing, honestly, was like the line of sight stuff, right? Like we could not go up into some of the areas where like the fighting was heaviest. So we were out of JBAD airfield in Nangarhar province. We tried to push up to Kunar as much as we could. We were able to get to like other like places kind of around JBAD, and there was a lot of dudes, as it turns out. Like there was a lot of bad dudes in that area that they just didn't fight there because that's where they had like their support zone. But we were still able to roll up people because, you know, they live somewhere.
Right.
Turns out they don't always live where they fight. Some of them do. But we went up to Kunar a few times, and if you get too deep into those mountains, you start losing link. And so there were a couple times where we'd be supporting, you know, like conventional dudes up there. And yeah, we would just lose link. And then the aircraft would like automatically want to come back, and then we'd reacquire it and try to push it back up. And so we had like a map of like where we could fly. But, you know, I just felt bad for some of the dudes that we'd be supporting, like they'd be on the ground, like humping these mountains, right, up and down. And then we'd be like, dude, I can't, like, this is as far as this bird will go. And so like, it was frustrating at times. We had conventional guys use us to like call in artillery, like, which I don't, we told them like, hey, we're not that's not what like legally, I'm not sure you're allowed to do this. They're like, yeah, it's fine. Like, just show us this mountainside. And so we did. And, then you'd see like all this, some rounds coming in, and we were like, okay, again, like made it clear that we were doing just the recon piece. But that was the most frustrating thing. In the tech now, I mean, it's so much different, right? Like if you get something that's either SATCOM, or even if you get somebody with a small quadcopter that you can just throw up in the air, you can walk up and down those mountains all day and you can see what you're looking at, especially if you have small attritable systems. So yeah, things changed a lot. What I will say though, is like, I'm just grateful that back then I wasn't looking over my shoulder constantly while I was out, like on the flight line, right? Like JDAD was not a bad place to be deployed. Like we had a couple of times where we got like rocketed, a few times where like, we didn't have, crazy enough, we didn't even have HESCO barriers on our side of the airfield. Like it was a fence. And I was like, at what point are like we gonna get like shot at on the flight line, right? And then we did, and I was like, okay, like at this point, right? It's like late one night, and so I'm in the hangar and I'm hearing like rounds at like 2 a.m. I'm like, that's not the range at 2 a.m., right? So we go out there and we're seeing the tracers like fly into like the base, and again, like we're not a combat arms unit, and so this is all conventional stuff. I'm like, what? I was like, get off the airfield, like don't like the aircraft is not as important as you guys not getting shot. So we had a couple of those things happen, but like by and large, like it wasn't like a crazy place to be. But I did apply for, so that was my first deployment. I ended up applying for SF at that point because I was a lieutenant. I was like in the window. I was like, I'm going to apply for special forces. I want to get into that community. So I had like a recruiter. I was emailing back and forth, but even then, right, like comms are not great. Emails sometimes don't always go through. I put a packet together. I sent it to him, and we're communicating. And then I remember getting back to Germany after my first deployment. This is well past like the deadline. And he emails me. He goes, "Hey man, I don't think we've got your paperwork. Can you send it again?" And I was like, so I did. And I got like an email, like I think like 2 months later, saying, "Hey, thanks for applying for SFAS. But you're whatever the like denial letter is that you get.
That's weird because I thought that you could go as a captain.
Yeah, so there was basically it was like you could do it for 1 year. I think you had to be a first lieutenant promotable to go, and then you could get a waiver or something like that. There was like a waiver you could get for a second shot, and I don't exactly remember what the stipulations were at the time, but it was like I was disappointed, right? Because I hadn't figured I would at least get a shot at SFAS. And if I didn't get picked after that, I would have been able to say, well, okay, I left it all like out there, but I didn't get picked up. But not to get a shot at like assessment selection, I was like, oh, okay, that stung a little bit. But then I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, I like doing the intel thing. It was pretty cool. Why don't I try to go to like SF group as an intel guy? And so after my second deployment with the same unit, where I was still doing a lot of support for the SOTF guys. This one was only 3 months, same location, same place, same setup. Came back from that one and just started working it, right? Like had a good friend who was down at 10th Special Forces Group, 1st Battalion down in Stuttgart, Germany. And I was like, hey man, like how do I get down there? And he was like, well, I can, we could bring you down for an interview. And so it's like, yeah, let's do it, man. Let me just come down and like talk to your commander. So I went down, I drove to Stuttgart, had an interview at 1st Battalion, 10th Group. And this was like right before I got orders for the captain's career course back at Fort Huachuca. And he said, hey, we think you're great. We'll work it through HRC, Human Resource Command. We'll try and get you on orders. I said, great. Got to Fort Huachuca and started the captain's course. And, about halfway through, like the assignment slates are coming out. And, I remember meeting with a branch manager and he was like, well, where do you want to go? I was like, well, I want to go to 10th Group. And he's like, that's back in Germany. You just came from Germany. I'm like, yeah, I know. I want to go back to Germany, A, because it's awesome. But B, like, I want to go down to 110. I already interviewed with those guys and they've, here's my by name request from the battalion commander. And he was like, that's not how we do things in the Army. Like in 05, like, what does this even mean? I don't care. Like I work for, whatever. And he said, "How about Alaska?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't think so, man. Like, we're going to work with it. You know, I'll figure it out." So I left that interview, you know, convinced that this guy was going to cut me orders somewhere else. And I called 110 and I said, "Hey, listen, I had my branch interview. They told me to go pound sand. They said a BNR ain't going to cut it. And they want to know, you know, like what the hell I was even thinking." And they were like, "Okay, cool. We got it." And 2 weeks later, I had orders for Stuttgart. So it worked out. Whoever they called. Yeah, whoever they called, it worked. And, you know, it was just another one of those instances where, again, I was just like, I'm not going to just wait for the big green machine to give me orders.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to get down to group. And so that was it. Then I was a group, and it was, you know, it was cool because I got to then go work with, you know, special forces, which is what I wanted to go do. I got to do it in Germany, and I got to do it as an intel guy. So I kind of got it all. Like, I kind of got everything I wanted. And it kind of worked out.
Hey guys, I want to take a moment to tell you about tonight's sponsor for the show, which is Ridge Wallets. I've been using this for about 6 months now. Really enjoy it. This wallet is made out of carbon fiber, titanium, and steel, and it really holds up and lasts. So, you know, in the past, I carried a leather wallet. You know, it's made by, you know, professional, has a small shop, and does leather work. And I mean, it was a nice wallet, and I really loved it. But the problem with those wallets is they get thicker and thicker and thicker, and we end up carrying around something that's like, you know, a little phone book in the back of our pocket after a while, and that leads to problems with your posture and everything else. So what I like about the Ridge wallet, it's really a minimalist design. So most of us are using cards these days, so it can hold all of your cards in here inside these elastic pieces that you can press out. And then there's a clip on the back. You can, I use it to clip money in when I do use dollars, can clip them in there. They have over 50 colors and styles, so it's not just functional. You can personalize it a bit as well. They have some that feature your favorite NFL teams and so forth. Losing your wallet is also pretty crappy. I've had that happen to me as well. Actually, that wallet, the leather wallet I was telling you about, I lost it on the subway. So there's that. But Ridge has an answer for that, Ridge AirTag attachment. And with that, you'll always know exactly where your wallet is before panic mode kicks in, all right? Ridge isn't just about wallets. They create premium everyday carry essentials like key cases, suitcases, and rings, all built with the same sleek, durable design. So right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. Get up to 40% off at ridge.com/house. Just head to ridge.com/house to see their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. So guys, please go and check out Ridge Wallets. This also makes a great gift. My girlfriend has one of these. My stepfather has one of these. So I've given them away too. I have one of them. And our producer, Dimitri, has one. So please go and check out Ridge Wallets. Tell us about being an intel officer in a special forces group then, because that's a different role. You're not on an ODA, but you're still doing the intelligence support for these operations. I mean, I'd be interested to hear some insight from what that's like.
Yeah, it was cool. And I think every phase of my career, like, it kind of, you know, got, I guess, it was very different each time, right? Like the conventional thing, like doing the direct aircraft, aerial exploitation support. That was like, I wasn't doing any intel analysis, right? I was collecting. I was a collector essentially. I was like, here's the raw stuff, and then it was the guys over at CJSOTF and at JSOC, and you know the people we were supporting, the first ID guys in some cases. It was their intel bubbas that were going through all that, right? So when I got to group, really to battalion, to 1st Battalion, 10th Group, now it was like, okay, you're the intel guy. But what I started out as was not the S2, so I was not the senior intelligence officer of the battalion. I started out as the military intelligence detachment commander, so mid-commander is what they essentially call it, right? And so think of I guess in the conventional army, it's like a MICO, like a military intelligence company that supports a battalion. In a special forces battalion, you've got a DET. And then I think we had close to 50 soldiers, and it was like we're force providers, right? I had SIGINT guys,
I had
guys. What's that?
The SOT A guys.
Yeah, that's right. I had a bunch of SOT A's, some SOT B's. We had some, we had a couple of humaners, some counter intel guys, and we had analysts. And so we had the whole kind of package to support the battalion. And it was cool. Like I managed a budget. I got to send guys to training. I got to make sure we had like the right equipment. We got some stuff installed to help guys do, the analysis better. We got our skiff certified on our floor. Like these are all cool things because like it finally like we could like enabled us to support the teams that were deploying. And so when I got there, like we were again like kind of the same, strangely the same setup as my first unit, where we had like a continuous presence in Afghanistan, and we would send companies out there, to set up an ODB and take their ODAs out there and do ops in Eastern Afghanistan. And so now it's totally different. So, I was in Germany, I think about a year until or maybe about 6 months or so. And then I deployed. I was kind of over there in Kabul with 10th Group pretty soon after getting there. But now because I'm forward, now I'm the senior intel officer for like that forward task force. And so now it's what you described, right? Now it's totally different from the collection piece. It's different from the force provider. Now I'm the guy that's fusing all the different ints together. And I think what's interesting about that is that it's a very fast-paced environment, right? Like guys are going out on raids. They're doing their training. And at the time we were training an Afghan police unit called the Provincial Response Companies. And so when I got there in August of 2011, August 2011, like we showed up, we were in Kabul, we had a continuous presence, but we had ODAs in like Wardak, Logar. We had some split team ops out in like, I think Sarobi. And so kind of like around the Kabul cluster where we had our ODAs aligned. And like their primary mission was to train these Afghan police.
Is that that's different than the Kandak commandos?
That's right. Yeah, they were different. And so the Kandak guys, I think were CJ Sodif, and like, then you had like some of the other cool things that, again, like I think some of the 3-letter agencies were doing and some of the other folks. But we were doing, it was very like law enforcement kind of focus. So they were like a branch of the Afghan National Police, but they were these provincial response companies. And so like I remind people too sometimes, like, SF, like and SF guys obviously that are watching this know this, like it's not designed necessarily to be a door kicker unit, right? Like that's the Rangers, right? Like we're supposed to do foreign internal defense, irregular warfare, and going out there with the locals to do the buy with and through stuff, right? And so that actually was a lot of what we were doing at 110. And it was an interesting opportunity to be the intel guy that was fusing all these different ints together. And so what I did was like, I liaised with all the conventional guys, like, what are you guys pulling in? Because we didn't control our own assets. We had to compete for all of our ISR assets with everybody else. And so, we would try to get aircraft. We would try to task some of our partners, and we even had like NATO humaners that would feed us reports too. And so we would pull intel from wherever we could to paint a picture of like, okay, what's going on in the province that this ODA is in? Who are the power brokers? Who are the main players? Who are the HVTs? Let's get a good understanding of what these roads look like. When is like the worst time to go up this route? When are we seeing the most incidents? And so the job really became a cross between like finding people, like finding the enemy. And it was also like telling our guys like what to expect, when they were out doing their missions, and then making sure they had the right assets in place.
So if I understand the job correctly, you were basically trying to take all these different inputs that were coming in and then getting to the AOBs and the ODAs, the information they needed to complete their mission.
Yeah, that's right. And we had a really good relationship with the 18 Foxes, right? So the intel sergeants on the teams, we would have I regularly had either myself or our NCOIC or our analysts just pick up the phone and call those guys. What was interesting though about our mission, I probably should have mentioned this up front. Like our ODAs were training the Afghans, but with each ODA was another, I think they called them SOTGs. It was like we had Romanian partners, we had the Slovak partners, and Hungarian partners. And so because we were a Europe-focused battalion,
I see. Yeah.
we had all of these like European soft guys that were like deployed with us in Kabul and around, right? And so you'd have like, I mean, it was cool. I came home with like a bunch of different uniforms because you trade a bunch of stuff. So I've got a Hungarian uniform, Romanian uniform somewhere, but like those guys would go out on these hits, right? And so so it was like an added layer of complexity. And as an intel officer, it did an additional layer of complexity because now I had like foreign intelligence officers that were like in our JOC that I was like working with. And of course, and far be it from me to criticize the way we do business, but like, I've got like 5 different computers, right? None of which talk to each other. I've got one for, like the Nipper, Sipper, and like, my JWICs, but then I've also got my BICES, which only talks to certain NATO partners. And then I've got one that only talks to the UK. And so like by the time you check all your email accounts, right, like that's a struggle in itself. But like the dynamic was really interesting because in some ways we helped develop our NATO soft partners. So it was like a capacity building exercise for both the Afghans and the Europeans. But then of course we were actually like doing like no kidding missions, right? So we would go, like these guys would go out and like roll dudes up. Or they would put the PRCs, which they were called, which now that acronym means something totally different, but they put these preferential response companies on target. And so it was like, there was a lot of inputs from a lot of different places. And again, like our job was to synthesize it. Like, why does it matter? And like, there's a lot of noise and what actually matters and what's noise.
No, that's really cool. And I was going to point out, I mean, you mentioned by, with, and through, the term that was coined by Mark Boyott, that describes how special forces works, going with accompanying, the host nation partner force on target, or by, where you're training them on the base and then you're sending them out on their own to do the mission. And then what you're describing with the European partner forces is through, that we are working with these European partners and they are in turn training these provincial forces. So you're completing the circuit there.
Yeah, no, it's that's the best way to point it out. I mean, it's absolutely right. And they were good, right? Like some of these guys were hitters, and they wanted to get out there and get work.
Well, those Eastern European units, some of them are pretty damn good.
Oh yeah, for sure. And we built we built a great relationship with those guys. When we first got in, I mean, we actually had a KIA, a US KIA, like within the first few weeks of like getting there. And so that really, and it was a pretty tough day, right? I mean, like it was like obviously like like that could happen, but you never wanted to. And it was a bad day, kind of all around. It was like a day that like the Capitol got attacked while we had an ODA out on target. All of our ISR gets pulled to go support like what's happening back in the Capitol. And so
was this when the big the hotel got taken over and all that?
Yeah, that was I think that was what was that September 13th, 2020.
Yeah, we interviewed one of the Kiwis that was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. So we were on the eastern part of Kabul at the time. So like we heard it going down, right? And we're like, okay, like something's happening, obviously. And we had a convoy of dudes out like in the city that day too, like our guys, like a couple of our guys. And like I was potentially going to go out there with them, but then I didn't because we had an ODA out. And so I was like, let me make sure we have ISR assets for them, and like maybe make sure I can like communicate. So it was a good thing I did. Like I was able to the extent that I could like fight for assets. And eventually we did get a bird back out to what was going on. But by that time we had troops in contact. And then, like I said, like one of our guys, one of our team sergeants was actually killed in action, which, and that was, it was, it sucked. Like that really set the tone for at least that part of the deployment. And later, and like we always, I mean, you don't forget that. And so, but it does kind of reinforce like, okay, like let's get after it. Like these are the dudes, like we're going to shut these networks down. We're going to, you're not supposed to take these things personal, but I don't know anyone who doesn't, when one of your guys doesn't get back. So, so that was 7 months. That was 2011 to 2012. And again, I think it was pretty productive. I mean, we had a couple of pretty good, uses of the, again, of our special assets that some of the European partners didn't have. But we had, intel about an attack on Kabul that we were able to, kind of find out like again, like vector the right people and get some folks on it. Actually, like the Kiwis helped us out with that one, and rolled some dudes up, and it was just enough to just like disrupt it. Like, I don't think we got like the HVTs, but we got some of the dudes that were supposed to be like, you know,
It was enough to
going out
thwart
and doing
it,
the thing.
to disrupt their plans.
That's it, right? And so kind of got chatter that like, hey, they were kind of lying low for a little while. They just bought us enough white space to then develop the networks further. And I think like what's interesting about like being the intel guy especially in an SF unit, and this is probably the case in conventional in some ways, but like it's a lot of targeting, right? It's a lot of like high value target, like finding people.
And you're having to think a few steps ahead too.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, where is he? Like, what is he doing? Like, really getting to know your adversary in a way where now it's almost like, you know, if I compare it to what a lot of my, I think, colleagues were doing in conventional units, it was, you know, we were doing briefings too about the area of operations, right? Like laying out the AOR and that sort of thing. But it was a lot more in the weeds of like finding HVTs and like trying to like, you know, take them down. And so like that was demanding for that reason too, because you had to find people. And it's hard to find people in Afghanistan, right? Like at one point I was like, why don't these people just have addresses? It'd be really helpful if I could just like plug something into a GPS, right? And like, but like it didn't exist. It was like a third mud hut from the right sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so like it was kind of a pain. But again, we had all the assets to do it, and like we had some really good teams. And again, the people we worked with were great. And so I think the longer you do it, the more you realize like, okay, like, you know, one, yes, you're trained to do it, but no real amount of training can really prepare you for like when you're there. And then like the environment's constantly changing. And so like the second time I was there with that unit, we had gone away from like hitting HVTs with US like forces, and then we had transitioned over to like making putting the Afghans in the lead. And so this was like 2012 timeframe. And then we had this thing called evidence-based operations, which essentially like we were supposed to like when we roll these guys up with
FBI agents,
response companies, yeah, right, like have some evidence that we can then present to an Afghan judge to put this guy away. And so that briefs really well, right? Like it sounds good, but again, I'm not here to like armchair quarterback this thing from 2025, but like I remember in 2012 thinking to myself like, okay, first of all, like I don't think the Afghans like even have like there's not a word for like evidence that means the same thing that we think it means, right?
Right.
Like there's not that concept wasn't well developed, and so then we're taking like our idea, like, oh yeah, all we got to do is catch someone red-handed, and then you know they'll go to jail. So that there was that, and then there was like the rampant corruption in some of these like ministries where you know you could find a person, I think you had 72 hours, and then you had to release them. And it made for like a pretty like it was not easy, right? Like it was just a, you know, I say that like, yeah, you know, it was hard, but it was unnecessarily hard, right? Like we could do hard things, we could find people, we could put them away, but then like when like you know 2 days later they're like, yeah, we had to let them go. You're like, come on, man, like we got him to, you know, we got him there. Now, like, what was not good enough about, you know, how we found him or what
was that a evidentiary thing, or was that that there was corruption with some of the judges? I mean, why, in your experience, were some of these guys, you know, going into this catch and release program?
It was hard. It's hard to say. I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was partially like incompetence, right, in the system. Like we were basically making these guys do things that they just had never done before.
Yeah.
There was corruption 100%, right? If you hit a guy that's high up enough, like, you know, he's going to call his buddy and they're going to, you know, they're just going to say, hey, let this guy go. Well, we promise you won't do it again, sort of thing. And so, you know, and some of the stuff is things I heard, right? Like secondhand knowledge, right? So it's like not all like direct experience, but you know, when I compared and contrasted like my 4 deployments to Afghanistan, like from 08 to 12, I kind of, you know, there were just like these small warning signs, right? That things weren't going so well, right? And anyone that's been over there knows, like, you know, and I think in 2012 it was the first time where I started thinking to myself, like, we might not win. Like we may not get out. Like in 08, I was like, oh man, we got this. This is going to be, you know, easy day. We're doing so well. By 2012, things were looking a bit different.
Is that because of, you know, you get the feeling that you're trying to like squeeze a round peg into a square hole and it's just not working?
Gosh, I wonder what, it's a good question. I remember, I think it was like '09, right? When the surge got announced, I was pretty motivated about it because I was like, yeah, like this is what we need. We're gonna clean this up. It worked in Iraq, to some degree. And so it's gonna work here. And I was a lieutenant at the time. And so like, I wasn't necessarily thinking about like the strategic picture. Like I was certainly thinking more about like my kind of slice of the pie there. But I think, there were a lot of things that we were trying to do that I don't know that we thought like I'm not sure if we thought that they were going to work or if we really ever got to the point where like we were ever accepted by some of the folks in some of the locals, right? I mean, I always said win hearts and minds, and I think in some cases we did. There were certainly people that loved working with us and were happy that we were there, but there's just enough of a difference, also just culturally too, right? I remember when I was driving around Kabul, I just remember thinking to myself, like, this place is so different from like, back home. And I think that, and that's easy to say. I think people were like, of course it's different. Like it's Afghanistan. Like, what did you expect? But I didn't realize how different and like how little in common I think I had with like even the Afghans that I interacted with a lot of times. And that's not to say we didn't have good interactions. I had very positive interactions with a lot of people over there, whether it was the guys that came on our base or like the bazaars or like, even interacting with people that you would talk to every now and then.
Just the cultural differences are still pretty
100%.
Yeah.
It was just so in that sense, there was some square peg round hole. And I just think, again, like, as things kind of worsened, it was just, it was little things, right? Like you'd hear stories like, oh man, when I first got here, we would drive soft skins to Bagram. And like, by the time I was driving to Bagram, like from Kabul, we would do like convoys every now and then. And I would love to jump on those because it was like an opportunity to get off the fob, right? Because like, again, as the intel guy, I'm not kicking indoors. I'm not even out on the objective. So any opportunity to kind of leave the wire, I was happy to kind of just go out and experience it and contribute. But, we would drive up to Bagram in these like, and this was supposedly the safest route in all of Afghanistan, right? This was the route where they were like, nothing ever happens here, but yet we were up there in like gun trucks, with Crow systems pointed out and everything else. And, I just thought to myself, man, things have gotten worse. And then in 2012, I remember there was this pretty massive attack on one of those Rhino buses. I don't know if you remember those or not, but they had these.
Do you mean like the extended MRAP?
Well, so it wasn't even that. Like that would have been fine. Like, they had basically like a bus that they would like weld a whole bunch of armor onto.
Oh,
it's
boy.
probably a little more sophisticated than that. That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And like it would pick dudes up from like, Camp Phoenix, and you go to like Kabul International, and it would go down to the southernmost base there, I forget the name, at the bottom of the city. But it would basically be like you would just drive dudes around. And so if you were getting a flight into Kabul International from, Bagram, but you had to get out to Camp Phoenix, unless you had someone picking you up, you were taking the Rhino. It was just this up-armored bus. Now, luckily, we had MRAPs, and we had people that cared about other people in our unit. So, like, we got rides, right? But it wasn't the case for everybody. And, like, we had a logistics unit next to ours, and that Rhino got hit by a vehicle-borne IED. And it killed like 20 people. I think the majority of them ended up being like contractors, but it was like 20 Americans that were killed in that blast.
Jesus.
Yeah, we never and in Kabul, like we never had anything, right? Like I think again, like it was pretty chill. We had like gunshots every now and then. Like I remember going out on like one of our convoys in like the Land Cruisers, because in town we would drive in Land Cruisers all the time. Like that was no problem. They were up armored, but they were, they weren't the MRAPs. And I got back one time and like down in the bumper, there was like I was like, was that hole there before? Right. Like, so like every now and then, like we would take like pot shots, but it was never anything. Like we never got into a firefight, right? Like Kabul was very chill in 2011, 2012, but things started changing at that point. We never worried about hitting IEDs on the side of the road. Like when I first got there, I was always like, oh, trash pile. Right. But like by the end of those deployments, it was like, yeah, we don't get hit here. Like Kabul's pretty safe. But things started to change, like I said, and then, it was around that time. It was when that bus got hit, and people started thinking twice about like, holy crap, we might actually be in a war zone here. It wasn't just out in the provinces; like things were coming to the capital. And that was my last deployment to Afghanistan before I went to the Special Mission Unit. But that's where I remember leaving, going home, thinking to myself, like, not as confident today as I was 4 years ago.
So tell us about getting back home and when this idea comes to you that, maybe there's something else you could be doing.
Yeah, no, it was great. So yeah, again, 4 deployments, did some cool stuff. I think, again, like even with 10th Group, I think we did impact the battlefield, successfully, like in our sector, right? And again, you look at the great scheme of things, like you try to do what you can where you're at. And I think for the most part, we moved the needle in the right direction. To not to speak for the rest of the war necessarily, but we got back, and then this was 2012. So end of 2012, I get assigned to, I guess it was end of 13. Yeah, so mid 13. There we go. And it was kind of like late 12, early 13. I started kind of getting a couple of ideas, like, okay, I want to do something kind of different. Like, I don't want to go back to the conventional Army. And as an intel officer, you do, right? Like, you can't just camp out in SOF forever, right? Like, you get your 3 years, and then like, come on back. You got to go be a S2 at a, whatever. And I was like, all right, I get it. And like for the career, that might've been the right call. But I was like, what else can I do? And so I started looking into like these various different special mission units. And then I looked at another one, which was not a special mission unit, but it was essentially a human program where as an officer, you could get selected to go be a human collector.
The INSCOM stuff.
Yep, that's right. And so I started looking at all of those. And I started getting emails from people that were named like Dan and Roger and Bill, and like that was it, right? Random email addresses. And they were like, hey, we want you to try out for this. And so I actually had like 3 dates set with 3 different opportunities to go back CONUS and just try out for that. And I think, again, like I was lucky that I was in a Special Forces battalion because I think it raised my profile among some of the recruiters in the special mission unit space, which as I found out later when I was doing the recruiting for my replacement there, like that's definitely like it helps.
Yeah.
Because they're looking for a specific mindset and like a specific set of skills
experience. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I just said, all right, like I'm just going to go check this out. So I took a flight back to the States. I had an assessment. This one was, as I could tell, was less ops focused. There was one that I had that was an ops focused assessment and selection that was scheduled. This one was more of like an intel focused one. They were like, if we pick you, it's going to be our senior intelligence officer. And we want you to do that. And I said, okay, cool.
You actually assessed for 3 different units?
No. So yeah,
okay.
I had 3 different things on the schedule. Yeah. Okay. Had 3 things on the books. So basically, like, I think it was like March, it was like this one, and then I had one scheduled for April and one scheduled for May or something like that. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to cast a wide net. I'm going to try to get into one of these cool like things. Mm-hmm. And then, but for this very first one, it was for an intel officer position in a special mission unit. And so I said, cool, let's do it. And so the assessment was very intel focused, right? It was like, here's a bunch of information. I'll be back in 45 minutes. Like, give me a brief. And I was like, holy crap. First of all, this is way too much information to go through in 45 minutes. Like, there's no way I can like do all of this. But that's the point, right? The point is for you to like figure out in a very difficult situation, under some degree of pressure, like, he wants a brief in 45 minutes and you've got like 800 pages of stuff and a bunch of maps. What matters? And so like that goes back to like, what matters, right? Like, what's the noise? Go through the noise, figure out what it is, dump that, figure out what the most important points are, and come up with options. And so when he came back 45 minutes later, I briefed him on the situation. Here's what I think, like your options are, and here's like all the ways this can go sideways. And like, he didn't say much, and he was like, cool. And he left. And I was like, all right, that either went really well or it was like the worst brief he's ever gotten. Well, I guess we'll find out. And then there were a few of those types of kind of scenarios over the course of about a week. And at the end of it was a board, because that's what you get anywhere. And it was, and then it was, and I don't know, like, I'm sure you've been to these boards, like they make you feel like, I felt like the worst person ever. They're like coming up with like, throwing all kinds of stuff and like, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? And I'm like, I'm just being honest. I'm like, yep, I've done that. I've done this. And I was thinking to myself, man, there's no way these guys are going to pick me. They're like, this is the worst dude ever. And like at the end of this like scathing interview, they're like, all right, go back, we'll call you back. And I was like, all right. So it's hard to describe how you feel. You feel a little bit despondent, right? You're like, hopefully.
Did they hit you with a lot of like scenarios that have like moral quandaries and things like that? Like, I don't know what's the right answer.
Totally. And that's right. There doesn't seem to be a right answer to any of it, right? You're just like, oh, this, but I do that. It's a lot of like gray space, right? But look, I mean, at the end of the day, like I was like, okay, just you got to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one's looking, sort of thing. Because there was some of that too. Like, well, what if you could get away with it? And it's like, no, you shouldn't do that. And then,
that's a big part of it is like they want to see that you can keep your cool, right?
That's right.
That's the real point. That's
right. And those are things that you kind of figure out, like throughout the course of the interview, right? Like later, like during the time you're just answering questions, and then you're getting lightning rounded, and there's 5 like very intimidating looking dudes like questioning you, and you're just like, well, I hope I don't screw this up. But at the end of it, like I was, they called me back in, and you sit there somewhat meekly, right? We're going through the ringer. And I just remember the president of the board, he just looks me square in the eye. The very last question he asked me was like, all right, well, do you think you're the right man for the job? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And then he said, so do we. And then he like stood up, shook my hand, and I was like, okay. And then I still didn't know who these guys were. I got no idea. I just knew they were some special mission unit. And I had no idea like really what designation it was. But then they told me, like, okay, here's where you're going to be. Here's what you're going to be doing. Here's who you're going to be working for. But they basically made me commit before they would tell me that. And so that was another one of those things where it was like, are you willing to jump into the deepest end of the pool, not really knowing what's down there, but it's probably pretty cool and you're going to be doing cool stuff. And again, for me, it was not necessarily like, I want to go be a cool guy. It was like, how do I have the most impact? I mean, this is the height of the war on terror. We're not necessarily like winning everywhere. And like, this is, by the way, like 2013. I mean, now, ISIS isn't a thing yet, but like AQI is, and they're doing a lot of bad stuff. Right. And so like, this was like, for me, it was, it sounds cheesy, but it was a calling, right? I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to go do this. This is how I can be most impactful. It's with this unit at this time. And I said, yeah, absolutely, sign me up. And so that was how that concluded. I flew back to my unit, and then I just called the other 2 units that I'd had like interviews set up with, and I said, hey, listen, I took something else. I appreciate the opportunity. And they were like, cool, thanks for applying. So it was good.
That's awesome. So tell us about like arriving at a special mission unit, like how this differed from 10th Group, from conventional forces. I mean, what was sort of the atmosphere and the vibe like when you hit the ground?
Yeah, it totally different, right? And again, it's funny, going back to what I said kind of at the beginning of this, right? Like I was always told, like, I'll just wait till you get to the real army. Things will be different.
Right.
And like, I never made it to the real army. So like, I think for that, like, if anything, like that was my metric for success was like, how can I stay out of the real army for as long as I can? And this was like the farthest from like the real army, right? And so I show up, and the biggest difference, and this is not taking away from my time at 110, that's not taking away from my time at 66 MI. I worked with professionals everywhere. There were good people everywhere. But this unit was markedly different in that every person there was handpicked. Nobody there just got orders. And like they told us, like, listen, every day is selection, man. Like, like if you don't want to be here, or if we think you're not cutting it, like we'll move you on. And that's not a threat. That's just what we do. And we need you to be, we need you to be at the top of your game every day. And I was like, excellent. Like, this is where I want to be. I welcomed that. It was really awesome to work with, just incredibly skilled, and not just skilled, but like dedicated, right? People that really wanted to be there. There was no one there that was like, well, I'm just going to do my time here and then I can go do whatever. every day, people that you worked with showed time and again that they were there for a reason.
You hear over and over again guys talking about how, like, they say, in my unit, I was like the rock star. I was this awesome guy. I was the first in the PT test. I was, this and that. And then they get to this other unit that they finally wind up in, and it's like, oh, I'm just average here.
Yeah, totally. Right. And, but you, in some ways, it's like, I think for some people that's hard to get over, because they're like, wait a minute, like I'm supposed to be the dude. But for me, I just realized like everybody here does a job, right? And there was no like, oh, you're just an intel guy, why don't you stay in your skiff? It was like you were part of the team, and it didn't matter what your job was. If you were there because you had a job that nobody else could do, right? Like I couldn't do what the operators did. I also couldn't do what the logisticians did. I couldn't do what the finance guy did, right? But I could do intel, and that's what I got hired to do. And that goes for everybody else. Nobody wanted to do my job because they loved doing theirs, but they knew that I would do mine well and that they could trust what I provided. And so when I showed up, like, it was awesome. I had a section of dudes. We wore civilian clothes like almost all the time. I was a captain when I got there. I was the only officer in my section. People called me Nick, and that was it. And it was awesome. Right. Like it was like and so again, like more and more of the like
professional, yeah.
Rank didn't matter as much. It only mattered insofar as like people knew like every rank had a different job. And yes, at the end of the day, like what that section produced was my responsibility. But the soldiers knew that, and the NCOs knew that. And so it wasn't like nobody was like, nobody showed up trying to like, make me or anybody else or themselves look bad. It was like, we all have a job to do. And like, this is just the way it is. And so like, yeah, like when I said, hey, we're going to do it this way, like, yeah, we did it that way. But like, there wasn't any, there wasn't like griping and complaining necessarily. I'm sure there was, but it wasn't like in other places, right? Like, it was just like, it was a very professionally run organization. And I loved it. I mean, from like day one, it was like incredible. And so I got the opportunity there. I was in that unit for 3 years, from 13 to 16. And this was like height of war on terror, CT. ISIS is forming over in Iraq. And so I got a chance to deploy with a couple of the numbered task forces. I got to do 3 of them overseas, and then I got to do one back at headquarters. Doing again like some of the coolest stuff. I think that anybody could say they've done. Yeah. But again, working with some of the most professional people ever.
What can you tell us about those trips?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, we would go overseas, and then we would typically be, called the task force, right? That's what everybody would refer to us as. And, the first time around was like Middle East focused. And so like our AOR was essentially, it was Iraq, Syria. We had,
we're into the ISIS war at this point.
Yeah. So this was like early 14, like the split hadn't happened yet, but like, we were seeing the signs, right? And so there was a lot of things happening in Syria, and so we had a lot of just kind of like essay on what was going on, but we weren't like necessarily operational yet. And at that point, we were kind of operational in like some of the surrounding areas, where we were doing a lot of the intel support to like teams in that area. And so essentially like, and that was a lot of like by with and through some of the local forces.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be very interested to hear, kind of your perspective on that time frame, because I was in Syria in 2014 as a journalist, and my impression was that we didn't have no American military presence on the ground at that time, as far as I knew. Could be wrong, but I'd be interested, like, what sort of like your insights were, what you guys were kind of gathering from that situation at that time.
Yeah. So I was not in Syria. We were not in Syria. I'll just clarify that. So I think you're probably right. I don't know that we had a presence, certainly not the presence that we ended up having later. But this was around the time where, certainly we were still pretty active in Iraq. We had people in Jordan. I think we had some people in Lebanon, and we were just kind of all around the periphery. And this is like U.S. forces and like, obviously conventional. You had the Siege of Sodif guys all over the place. And then you had a few of our guys just kind of like in various different places in the AOR, like usually a very small kind of footprint, right? Doing direct support to various units and various organizations. And so that's what much of it was. And we saw the split in Syria start to happen. We were like, I had a really good analyst that was working for me at the time. And she was like, this is going to go down. It's going to happen in Iraq. We really need to pay more attention to this because there's going to be a huge thing here.
What do you mean when you say the split?
So the split between AQI and ISIS.
Gotcha.
Yep. Or al-Nusra, I guess, right? Like al-Nusra and ISIS, like they were kind of like on the same, like Al-Qaeda, ISIS.
In Syria,
like
yeah.
Yep. And then like, that's when like the actual split happened. Then ISIS like became a thing, right? Established the caliphate, rolled over like parts of Iraq into Mosul and all of that. And so I remember in like 14, we wrote this like intel white paper, basically saying like, hey, we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to go. But this ISIS thing is not just like, this is not like, this is not going to go away. It's going to get a lot worse. And I don't think even nobody could, like, I don't know that anybody knew how bad it was going to be. I'm sure there were some people who were probably tracking this. There was probably something that was like, alarm bells ringing. But again, like it's, some of it's disjointed, and sometimes not everyone's talking to everybody.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that if that female analyst was the only person in the U.S. government who came up with that, I'd believe it.
No, I'm sure there were quite a few. But she had a lot of experience in that AOR, and so she was like, what she was seeing, and again, this goes back to like your analysts like knowing their stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And she was like, this is gonna be bad. And so, we at least raised our little warning flag and saying, hey, we think, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it did. And again, I'm sure there were a number of people and like, I'm sure CIA and NSA and all those guys, they probably saw the same things and were pushing things up through their channels. And it's not to say nobody listened. I think people probably did. But I think everybody was surprised at the speed at which ISIS came in and took over some of those swaths of territory. And then from there, it was a pretty long slog, as to get them out.
Yeah, I mean, ISIS busts across the international border into Iraq. These cities start falling like dominoes. Sinjar experiences essentially a genocide. I mean, things got pretty bad. I think the United States military finally got involved when ISIS was kind of moving on Dahouk, and that was sort of when we really stepped in. Yeah,
no, that was it was crazy to kind of see it. And by the time that happened, I had come back stateside. And so I was kind of back in the unit doing the in-between deployment stuff, kind of training and kind of, getting caught up on being back home. But it was a fascinating time period. I was back out 120 days later. And this time it was a 120-day rotation supporting the Africa AOR. And so I had basically started in Middle East, but interestingly, I guess I started in Afghanistan, right? Southeast Asia or Southwest Asia, and then ended up doing Middle East stuff. And then I ended up over doing North Africa stuff for a while. And so now we were supporting a lot of things happening in kind of the Sahel region, and really looking at kind of what's taking place there. And so this is 14 and then going into 15. And what's interesting about that was people weren't really paying attention to North Africa, right? The ISIS fight was in Iraq. We had people looking at that, but there were elements of Al-Qaeda and not so much ISIS yet at the time, but Al-Qaeda was metastasizing pretty badly in certain parts of Libya, Mali, Burkina Faso, all the places that were kind of being ignored in some ways. And then Libya, obviously after the Gaddafi regime collapsed. I mean, what's fascinating about that whole place is there was, again, Gaddafi, bad dude, 100%. But that place was, the Sahel region was pretty stable in terms of weapons flows and things like that, right? As soon as that regime collapses, you see weapons flows going from Libya through Niger down into Mali. The Azawad rebellion breaks out again. A bunch of the AQIM guys they get crazy down there. And so now we're doing a lot of support to some of the folks down there to try to keep basically just to keep tabs on what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of sort of the U.S. military presence in that part of the world was that you had an at-risk population. There's a lot of poverty. There's already an Islamic fundamentalist movement in some form there. Was the fear that this part of the world was going to turn into the next Afghanistan in the sense that terrorist organizations were going to be able to camp out there and mount international, external operations?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 100%. And obviously, like our European partners were concerned about that, right? Like, I mean, the French
Rightly
had
so,
a
yeah.
heavy presence down there, and we worked pretty closely with them, right? I mean, the French were great partners. I mean, people want to give France a hard time for stuff. Like when they went out there and like
They're
got on target,
aggressive.
I mean, they would burn it down, and it was pretty effective. And so, you know, we would partner pretty closely with the French, and you know, we're able to provide a lot of the support on the intel side. And again, right, like counterterrorism is just like so much different from even counterinsurgency, because now there's no evidence-based operations, right? Like there's none of that. Like that's out the window. We're not building schools in these places. Like this is just targeting. And I think the biggest difference from like being, you know, in my first unit, being in 10th group, and then ended up working with like special mission unit, is the pace of like, you know, operations is just substantially higher. And you're very concerned now about strategic fallout from, you know, hitting something somewhere in a country that, you know, so there's a lot of work that you have to do. I mean, you have to work with the State Department, you work with, you know, country teams, you know, you have to make sure that what you're doing is like 100% like good to go, because like the last thing you want to do is cause an international incident, cause a problem, right? So
Did most of that have to be done through partner forces, like very little unilateral?
yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, we did like almost everything was through partner forces in that part of the world, right? Because we didn't have an action arm. There weren't U.S. forces that were out, you know, doing a lot of stuff. But I will tell you the assets and the support that we had at our disposal in that unit compared to where I was like anywhere else I've been before,
Yeah.
right? I'd have to fight for ISR. I'd have to do all these things. But, you know, once you come over to like the task force side, things kind of open up a little bit more. You're being tasked to find national level targets, and that's, you know, it's a different league in some ways. So again, it kind of goes back to what I said about like showing up there. Like everybody was there for, you know, for a reason, and knew what they were asked to do. So when you're forward, it's even more important that you know, you're crossing your eyes, you know, or crossing your T's, dotting your I's. See, there you go. I gotta say it right. But it became very important, right? Because like mistakes out there, like were, you know, that they're bad everywhere, but certainly at
An international incident
at that stakes, it's no good.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, mostly partner forces. We did end up, there were a couple of kind of like publicized things that took place later. Like there was a strike in North Africa that took place in 2015, which we enabled, and that was, you know, it was a pretty big deal at the time.
Is this the one where we detained a pretty high level bad guy?
That was before, so I can't take credit for that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Same general area. But this time it was like we weren't putting like people on the ground. Like now it was like that ended up being an airstrike just because of where this was.
Gotcha.
But again, like this was like certainty, right? Like high value target, but like near certainty level of fidelity on the target, right? Which means, you know, as an intel guy, like now you're tasked with, you're weaving together every int you can imagine, right? You've got everything, like you got signals intelligence, you've got human intelligence, you've got, you know, geospatial stuff. You're pulling together old imagery from like, you know, years ago to see what it looked like then compared to what it looks like now. I mean, the amount of work that goes into like kind of developing a target and then figuring out like, okay, like if we end up putting like bombs on this house, like who are we gonna kill, right? Like this is like, we got to know that. Like it's not just like, okay, we think. So, you know, we spent a lot of time developing that, using various different intel disciplines, and we built a good enough picture. This went all the way up to the NSC, and you know, got approval to go ahead. And so like we were in that, and that's what we had to convince. Like, and that's the other crazy thing about being in a unit like that, right? Like I'm concerned about like getting the O5 to approve it, but like I'm also at this point like, you know, like it's going all the way up to the NSC, and they're asking questions about like, well, okay, well, what's going on with this? Like, you know, are you sure you counted the slant correctly, right? And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we did. And like, you know, you got to show your work.
Do you want to explain to the general public out there what a slant is?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, so basically like it's three numbers, right? And so, like a good slant count might be 300, which means there's three males, zero females, and zero children, right? Like if you have that slant count on a building, or on an objective, like you're probably looking pretty good. If your slant is anything like 3-3-1 sort of thing, like you're not dropping, right?
3-16-12, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. And like we had a situation in Afghanistan one time. This is actually crazy. This is back when I was with 10th Group. We had an ODA on the ground doing a call out. And so they were just we found where this guy was. They went out and like they did the soft knock. They had the all go, and then we dropped ordnance on this house, and which is of course, like at that point we were cleared hot to go, right? Not us, but like the Air Force that was flying overhead. They were good to go. We had the ISR up taking a look at it, and when they went in to kind of do the battle damage assessment and everything else, I mean there was guys still alive in there and like kept fighting. I mean, I just remember like being like, holy crap, man, like these guys are, again, right?
That's part of like that Pashtun warrior culture that they're like, yeah, we're sending the women out and we're here to mix it up and get it on with you guys. And yeah, of course the US military is like reticent to send a bunch of assaulters in to get shot up for no reason.
That's right. But it was such it again underscored, like, to me, I was like, these dudes are, they're willing to fight. And I never did like a long Iraq deployment, right? Like I did like short trips over there. I did short trips to Iraq, but I never did like a multiple month deployment to Iraq. And so I didn't really have as much kind of experience kind of like with like the insurgency there in terms of like how they would fight. But everything I had heard was like the Taliban, like they fought much differently, right? They would fight it out to the last man, and they would fight you. Whereas sometimes in Iraq that wasn't always the case. There was a lot of like hitting a convoy and then melting into the society or something like that, right? And the Taliban, like they would stick around, and so I think again in terms of you have to be able to respect the war-making capabilities of your adversary if you want to understand them. And I think that's one of those things where, people say, well, got to be careful how you use the word respect, but like you have to understand your adversary and you have to know what he's capable of. And if you underestimate him, it's going to end up being a bad day for you.
So, but before moving on, I'd like to hear kind of like your impressions about that Central West Africa sort of experience and how you saw that going. I mean, as we've seen things play out, I mean, the Wagner group played in that part of the world quite a bit. We got pushed out of Niger. I guess sort of like in the public sphere, as far as what we read in the press, like it's sort of a rollback. But what do you think of it?
Yeah. No, look, I think it's really unfortunate to see the amount of ground that the Western world has lost in Africa, especially in North and West Africa, right? And by the Western world, I mean like the French too, right? Like, I mean, obviously the French were great allies. They've got their own colonial past there, and so like that obviously plays into a lot of this stuff. And the adversary is great at using these narratives, right? Like what the Russians and the Chinese are really good at is taking like something out of history and then using that against us now, right? So like again, like the French experience in North Africa obviously has a legacy. Well, if you're a propagandist, that's great for you because you can just say, well, look, these guys are just here to exploit you. We're not colonialists at all. We're fighting against imperialism, right? And so you have these like these narratives being pushed by our adversaries that makes it easier for some people to latch onto that. And they've been able to use that pretty effectively to do some real damage to our standing there. And so, yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an area of the world that we can't really afford to let up on, right? I mean, like Africa is it's a growing continent. I mean, like I forget where I heard this, and I'm probably going to butcher the statistic, but like it's like 50% of the world by 2050 will be African or something like that, or more. Like it's a ton. It's a lot of people, and it's growing economies. And like, we can't just look at that continent and say, well, if we lose ground there, it's no big deal. And then on the terrorism aspect, like, take economics aside for a second, just the sheer just capabilities that these terrorist groups will build up in ungoverned spaces, like it's hugely problematic, right, to our safety and security. And so no one really talks about terrorism anymore because now it's all about great power competition. But I mean, terrorism is still very much a thing. And, if we cede the ground to, Russians, or in some cases Chinese, I mean, they're not going to do the type of CT that we did. And it wasn't always effective, but I can say that we had to great effect in some places. I mean, Tunisia is one example of a country where CT was very effective. Great partnership with the Tunisians, took out some pretty bad dudes at the right time. And you have a stable society, a decade later. And so, like, I kind of want to dispel some of this myth that, like, American CT efforts have always failed. Like, I don't think that's true at all. Number one, we haven't had another 9/11, but two, we actually have had incredible success in some of these places where there is stability now because of what we did, not despite of it.
Colombia, Philippines, number of places.
100%.
Yeah.
Those are great examples too.
Okay, so what was the next trip after Africa?
That was it. I did two of those, and so I wasn't, again, like, I should also clarify, like, we were like based out of like the AFRICOM like area, and so like I didn't like go to Africa except for like when I would go down every now and then, for like trips, but like but that was kind of how we ran that. And then I just did my last trip was not really a trip. It was like leading the task force intelligence component, like back at headquarters. And so that was a whole different ball game there, right? Because now, like, I'm not forward, but it's still like you still work deployment hours. You're still, showing up. And this is end of 2016. And it's kind of towards the end of like my like active duty career, because at that point I'd kind of again made the decision that I kind of wanted to do something different, and go in a bit of a different direction. But it was a really cool way to kind of finish out the career, because it gave me an opportunity to work, kind of our entire AO, and like see it from the headquarters level, and enable some pretty high profile things. It was also where, again, like that was the time, I think it was like 2016. So you had the attacks in Paris, you had the attacks in Brussels. Europe was on edge, right, during that time frame. And so we were in the thick of the fight. And it was also around the same time where, we were very effectively, we, the USG, pushing back ISIS all across, Iraq, and then, of course, back into Syria. And that, of course, concluded later on in I think 17 or 18. But really to like get momentum behind that, like it was, that was a lot of what was happening. It was like, how do we like generate enough momentum to start turning the tide? Because I remember that being a pretty, like, say, dark time, but like it was kind of scary, right? Like there was a lot of things popping off in places that were always considered kind of safe. And they were bringing the war to us in some places. And so even though we didn't have a lot of it happening in the US at the time, there was a lot of it happening in places where Americans went. And there was a lot of attacks too. And, I think the Bamako hotel got attacked that year, and we had an American killed. And so, again, I think it goes back to like, there was a lot of work. There was no shortage of it. So it was the height of it. We were busy, but so all to say, like, it was a really good 3 years in that unit. We got a lot done, and but it was at that point I'd made another career decision to kind of move on.
Before we get to that, any particular moments that stand out for you that you'd like to highlight from that time frame? Because I mean, you're right, a lot happened during that time frame. San Bernardino.
Yeah, I mean, I think like having the opportunity to go out and enable some of the ops that ended up, again, like having strategic level impacts, right? Whether it was like an airstrike, or whether it was, supporting the early days of the fight against ISIS to push them back. I mean, we had some real visionary leaders that were leading like elements of really a number of different special mission units at that time, right? Because there's definitely there's a number of them. But we just had the right people in the right place at the right time, and we just enabling their people to do the things that they needed to do. It was a really it was great to be part of that team. So I don't know that there's like one specific thing. I mean, it was just the ability to to be in trust, right? It came down to that level of trust.
Were you around for the Baghdadi raid?
No, I'd left there. So I was working in I think by that time I might have been in the Senate by then.
Okay.
But yeah, but those are the types, I mean, those are exactly the types of things, right? That are, that you're entrusted with that type of stuff. And, it's crazy when you think about it as a younger officer, you're like, man, I'm about to go I'm doing this, like I'm looking for this person, or I'm supporting this unit to do that. Right. Like those are like, looking back at it now, it's crazy. And like, anytime you get put in a situation, you kind of rise to that challenge and you say, okay, I'm going to go do it. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, looking back, I mean, it was definitely like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like definitely just like, very grateful for the opportunity, to be able to work there and do those things. I could have probably continued, after I think, ILE, there was an opportunity to potentially come back. But at that point I was like, all right, I think I want to shift. So I made the career shift at that point. There was a number of reasons. At some point I wanted to like actually like get married and have a family. It's hard to do that when you're gone all the time. And so, there was personal reasons, but there was professional reasons too. And again, I think part of it goes back to like, yeah, look, as an intel guy, like I might have gotten one more bite at that apple, but at some point I was going to go pay my dues.
Right.
But more than that, I was like, how can I keep serving at a strategic level and have the impact that I can have through service that isn't necessarily going to, like a conventional unit. And again, I don't want to like make the conventional guys sound like I didn't want to go there. I just think for me, it was just like, where can I have that next level impact? And so that's kind of what led me down my the next path.
Yes. Yeah, so tell us about that. You got involved with oversight of the intelligence community in the Senate. How did that come about?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy how it all happened. And in terms of like, just like, like life will throw you kind of roads and you like choose to go down them or not. But like, this was one of those things where I'd never in my life thought I was going to go be a Hill staffer or like go work on Capitol Hill or work for a member of Congress. I mean, I like, again, in the origin story, like I'm from a blue collar family, right? Like it's not like we're not connected, right? Like we're not from like a, politically connected family or anything like that. So just the thought, like, okay, yeah, I could work in policy. Like, after I left the Army, I transitioned to the reserve at that time, and then I ended up going to grad school. I used the GI Bill, and I went to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies here in DC, and I was trying to figure out like, what do I do with like 10 years, almost 11 years of military experience, and like this education, like how can I best impact like U.S. foreign policy and national security policy? And so that's what I really wanted to get into. And I had a few mentors when I was in like I said, in the special mission unit that kind of like helped like guide some of my decisions, and I bounced some ideas off of. But ultimately, I just met some folks that worked on Capitol Hill, and they were like, "Hey, you ever thought about doing that?" And so I said, "Yeah, I mean, this sounds cool. What do you guys do, right? Let's talk about that." And yeah, I met a lot of people when I did a lot of coffees, and ultimately I got a chance to work for a member of the House of Representatives, Brad Wenstrup, a Republican congressman from Ohio, who offered me a job as his military legislative assistant.
So was this like working in conjunction with Sissy?
So this is before Sissy. This is like how I got to the Hill. So like I leave grad school, I get hired in the House of Representatives as a military legislative assistant. I did that for a year. And then my boss was leaving armed services. And so for me, it was like, okay, well now I wanted to keep working on defense things. got a job working for Senator Joni Ernst as her national security advisor. She's a huge friend to SOF, great member of Congress.
Yeah, she loves Rangers.
Yeah, she does. She
Yeah.
does. And she's the chairwoman of emerging threats and capabilities. And so she's always looking at like, how can she support special operations? And she's been a real champion for a lot of initiatives. And I will say, like, not just the train and equip stuff, but also like the health and wellness stuff too, right? Like help making sure, that once these guys come home and women too, like once they get home, like that they're taken care of. And so she's always been real passionate about it. And so like, it was great to work for her. I got to do some really cool things. I got to travel to some cool places. At one point we went and did a trip down when Colin Green was down at, one of the SEAL teams down on the West Coast. I think he was out of BUDS. Like we went and saw like a BUDS graduation. And so like, it was cool to like see like those guys like finish and like, like that phase and kind of be there in totally different capacity, right? Like I'm not there in uniform. I'm there with like a tucked in shirt, like holding a senator's like note bag and sometimes her purse, right? Like it was like a totally different experience, but it was so cool to be able to do that. And then after I worked for her, I got an opportunity to work for Senator John Cornyn, and he's obviously a senator from Texas, and he was on the Intelligence Committee, and he still is. And so I started working out as his national security advisor, and then a year into that, his designee on the committee said, "Hey, I'm leaving. Do you want my job? I'll tell the boss. I'll put in a good word for you." And so, so he asked me directly, the senator asked me, he's like, "Hey, Nick, you've done a good job in my office. Do you want to move over to the committee?" And so, what that essentially means is like now, rather than working directly for a member of Congress, I'm now working for an oversight committee. And so technically I worked on, at the time, Senator Marco Rubio's staff as a professional staff member, but I was chopped to John Cornyn. Like that was my principal. And so for all intents and purposes, like anything he needed done on that committee, briefings, he wanted to read intel, and he read a ton of intel. I mean, he's one of the best informed members of Congress because he takes the time to go down to the skiff, read an intel book. I'll print it out. I'll read all the stuff. I'll highlight stuff. I'll even, like, it wasn't my job to do analysis there, but I'd done it for 10 and a half-ish years, right? And so
you say this is what's important for you.
That's right. And it's like briefing a principal. I briefed, generals and in some cases, when I was doing the North Africa stuff, we would sometimes brief ambassadors on things that were happening. And so now I was briefing a senator. And so it was a natural transition. And it was, again, I don't want to use the word easy. There's nothing easy about it, but like, it felt natural and it felt like the right place to be. So that was a real fun job. And like, it wasn't just getting to interact with I still think one of the last remaining great statesmen out there. I think John Cornyn is definitely like that person. But it was the opportunity to do oversight of the intelligence community, which is a place where I had spent so much of my time as an intelligence officer in the Army. So now it's so funny because I remember being, a task force guy out at an embassy and like hosting a CODEL and hosting a staff del, right? So a congressional delegation and a staff delegation where we would brief members of Congress on like what was happening in our AOR. Well, now, like I was the person doing the staff dels, right? But like what was cool about that is like of course I got assigned the Middle East and counterterrorism because when I show up and they're like, "What's your background?" It was pretty clear like what portfolio I was going to be assigned for the committee. But I loved it. I mean, I love that region, and so every chance I got, I would go out there and talk to our foreign service folks. I would talk to people that were out there in these embassies, State Department and other places, and like ask them like what was happening and how we could be helpful.
Do you want to tell people about what HPSI and CISI are and sort of like how they integrate into the intelligence community or interact with the intelligence community? Yeah,
no, that's a great point. So like basically these committees, they're congressional committees, right? So on the Senate Intelligence Committee, I think we had 17 members. And so it would essentially be, whoever's in the majority, right? So if the Republicans are in charge, you've got, 8 Republicans or 9 Republicans, 8 Democrats. And And that number has kind of fluctuated over the years. I think it's like 15. It's been 15, 16, and 17. But bottom line is like these are like the 17 senators that are tasked to authorize everything the intelligence community does, and really all their programs and budgets. And then you've got a number of House members. I don't know exactly the number that HPSI has, but each chamber has their own oversight committee. Our job is to be the eyes and ears of the American people, to make sure that the intelligence community is executing like appropriations and authorizations in accordance with the law and policy, right? Like that's what we do. And what's interesting about that is like, there's an armed services committee that does it for DoD. There's a foreign relations committee that does it for the State Department. There's these different committees with different jurisdiction of the federal government. But what's unique about the IC is that there's nobody really looking at it, right? Like other than the people that are doing it, right? There's no cameras in a CIA skiff somewhere, right? Like that, but as opposed to like the embedded reporter that's out with like a platoon of Marines and like Anbar, right? Like that's kind of like that's like public oversight in some ways, right? Well, that doesn't exist for the IC. And so like we had, 17 members, and then we had like about 40 staff, about evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. A number of those were, front office staff, and then you had kind of the professional staff members, which is what I did, where you're assigned a portfolio, and that could be a region, it could be a function, it could be both. So I had Middle East, I had counterterrorism, I had a budget account for one of the agencies that I oversaw, and then I had my boss, right? So working for Cornyn, and so everything he wanted, plus everything the Vice Chairman Marco Rubio wanted on like my portfolio areas. Was kind of my responsibility. And so oversight is everything from, drafting a yearly authorization bill. It's traveling to various places to do oversight in the field. It's going out to the headquarters to interact with analysts and collectors. And it's really, at the end of the day, like the way I approached it was like, people always joke like the worst phrase in the world to hear from anyone in the government is like, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. But like, I really did take that to heart, because I wanted to be helpful. Like I was like, we're one team. And what I found was that if you picked up the phone and called somebody, or you made the effort to go visit them, like where they are in like a really dusty part of the world, maybe they appreciate that. And like, you end up getting a lot more done because you're not getting stonewalled. People, it's
ground truth.
100% ground truth. And like, okay, this staffer cares. Like he got on this plane, he flew out here. It's dusty. It's whatever, but he's here and he wants to learn about what we do. And by the way, when I got back and I produced a report for my colleagues, I then also had the opportunity to write legislation to directly impact the work that was happening. And so we actually drafted a couple of bills. It was cool. I got to work on Chips for America. And so that was one of the big kind of semiconductor bills that we wrote when John Cornyn was the lead sponsor for that. That was before I got to the committee. But then after that, I got to help on a few things. I got to draft a bill called the Sensible Classification Act of 2023. And that bill basically was really, the big aim of that was to reestablish trust between the American people and our elected government, and not just the elected government, but also our, the appointees under that elected government. And so there's a lot of just, there's a lot of misconception out there about what the intelligence community does. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about, they're doing this, they're doing that. I can tell you, we would have probably seen it if that was the case. There's a lot of just incredibly dedicated and professional men and women out there doing some really dangerous and really hard stuff. And so like one of the things we did was just like try to, help them with how they classify things and how we declassify things so that, the American public could know as much as they could without endangering sources and methods. And so that bill passed into law. Again, some of those things will remain to be seen if how effective they are.
And we kind of saw that, I feel like, in the run up to the second invasion of Ukraine, where we sort of like, I don't know, weaponized is maybe not the right term, but we operationalized intelligence. you know, and a lot of times we collect intelligence and we don't really do anything with it. But in this case, the United States government used the intelligence we collected to like kind of say, hey, Putin's going to invade this country. This is what he's planning to do, et cetera, and kind of used it in a political way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, like that was some of the, I think they call it intelligence diplomacy. It was some of the most brilliant intelligence diplomacy I've seen, right? In terms of like getting people on board, and using what we had available to convince partners and to convince partners and allies that this was going to happen. Because there were people even like, I think to the very last day, right. Where they were like, nah, there's no way this happens. Right. But even I think the Russians themselves probably, I mean, again, I can't speak for them. I have no idea, but I would think that there was some disruption there too, because they were like, holy crap, like the Americans know what's going on. Like, how's this possible?
They're inside the network.
No, that was stuff. Now, what's interesting though, by the way, and I should point this out, is like open source intelligence is so much more ubiquitous now than it's ever been. Right. Yeah. And so now if you're trying to like, you know, hide the fact that you're going to invade a country, you basically have to lie to your people about the fact that you're about to invade a country. So like, I don't think it was shocking that a bunch of these like Russian kids that got sent to the meat grinder, like thought they were on a training exercise until it went down. Yeah. Right. Because they didn't want them saying, like posting on their social media, like, hey, we're going to go invade Ukraine tomorrow. And so I think that there was probably some of that. But you know, there's so many open source things now, like imagery, right? So like I can buy a bunch of imagery from like, what is it, like Planet Labs and Maxar and Hawkeye 360 or whatever. And if I'm looking at open source imagery and I'm seeing refrigeration trucks near the front line, like there's only one thing you got to keep cold, and that's about, you know, it's going to expire in 30 days. So like when we started seeing that stuff show up, like it's blood. You're going in. Like that's.
Oh, I see.
You know, that's the type of stuff that was a pretty clear indicator. I think that, you know, again, all unclassified imagery was able to pick up, and people could say that, you know, again, this goes back to like understanding like what you're looking at. Yeah. But if you're looking at something and you're like, well, what could possibly be so important that they're like bringing this out here? Like you're not bringing that out here unless you're ready to go. Right. And so I think now it's such an interesting battle space because you've got all these commercially available technologies that are just available to anybody.
And they're starting to restrict them too from, you know, the private citizen that's using the satellite imagery. You're seeing some of them like curtail it because there's political sensitivities around what they're doing. Yeah,
totally. And that's another thing that, you know, I think people are wrestling with in Congress now, you know, about like, what's the right touch? Like, how much should the government get involved? Yeah. I wrote a bill that, you know, again, looking at commercial activities of like former intelligence officers, like it was not illegal for intelligence officers, not that people were doing this necessarily, but like there was no ban on former IC folks from like working for like China necessarily, right? But then we had a bunch of former F-16 pilots that came up in the news where they're training the Chinese Air Force, and so that was another thing where we were like, this looks like a potential problem, and so you know, wrote a bill, got enough co-sponsors, and there is now a permanent ban in place for former IC like personnel to work for adversaries, and to me, like that's not I'm probably not really restricting anybody's like career ambitions, right? Like, I don't think most people join the IC to go do that.
Well, if you are, the hell with them.
Well, that's fair enough. The other thing, though, I think, is that it closes off a recruitment avenue for the Chinese, right? And I think that's what we're looking at now is like the Chinese are very good at looking at where to recruit and like who can they get to come teach them things, whether it's, you know, finance, whether it's logistics, whether it's AI, tech. I mean, there's all this, like, there's a lot of money being thrown at this. And so intelligence is another hot commodity. So we were able to close off that recruitment avenue to them. And I think that's the type of work that we were able to accomplish in the Senate. And what I loved about working in the Senate is like, there's no bureaucracy, right? Like people who work at DOD, they talk about like, you got to go through 8 levels of approval to, you know, do anything. And then it takes months to get a memo produced. I mean, literally I sat in front of my boss like every week and I briefed him on the world's happenings and handed him a briefing book. And then I wrote legislation and showed him, like, hey, does this meet your intent? Or, hey, I think we ought to do this. Do you want to introduce this bill? And of course, there was some level of approvals within his, his office. He had a chief of staff and everything that, in some cases, especially the stuff that wasn't classified, that they want to take a look at. But it was quick. I mean, we could turn that stuff in like an hour, right? Not in like a month or a day,
Right.
or something. And so it was an incredible opportunity to work for that institution. And in some cases, like I said, like doing some of those oversight trips abroad, meeting with foreign government representatives, in some cases being the first American in that country in a number of years, especially in like places like Central Asia, where, there's a lot happening there geopolitically now between, the Russians, the Chinese, and us. Those were some of, again, like, going back to the time of the Special Mission Unit, I always say, like, that was probably the coolest job I ever had. But working in the Senate was probably the most fascinating.
I was going to say, I mean, I respect you for going over there and doing those trips. And as a former Army guy, you were willing to do that. I've heard some pretty funny stories over the years from CIA officers running covert programs around the world. And, Congress is up their ass. Are you doing the right thing? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And they'll say, hey, if you don't believe us, send one of your staffers out here to come check it out. And a lot of times they're like, whoa, no, that's okay. Hey, we're good. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I had a kind of tight group of colleagues that I would travel with pretty often, and we had similar portfolios and interests and experiences. And I think, in some ways we prided ourselves with going to the hard places. There was a number of, I did once swing through a developed country or two, but I was typically in places that, again, like it was kind of what we did back in the old days, right? Like HESCOs, and in some cases, there were things happening. And so going out there as a staffer was a fascinating, just different experience, because now, you're going out there and you're sitting down. We went out to Djibouti, right, to go to JTF HOA, right? And you've got I'm interacting with the two-star commander in a way that I just wouldn't have interacted with him as a military officer. Now, it's just a very, very different relationship, and it's more of an oversight relationship. But again, not adversarial. No one's pulling rank. Like, it's just like, let's have a conversation, and how can we be helpful, and like, let's get you what you need to accomplish your mission, and just educate me on what's going on so that I can go back and tell my boss and all the other members of this committee about the important work you're doing, so that we can keep funding this. Or in some cases, like, maybe we don't need to fund it. Maybe we need to figure out like what a better solution is, right? Like, we can't get to that solution if we don't know. So yeah, so that was it. That was my 7 years on the Hill, and then I departed here in February, and I'm in the private sector now, and it's fun because now I'm working with a bunch of frontier tech startups, and so all the things I learned in the Army and on the Hill, and like, how does DC work? Now I'm working with Washington office, and like, what we do is we work with frontier tech companies that are coming to Washington, and they're like, how do I work here? How do I solve a problem for the military? Wow. Or like, what congressman or congresswoman should I talk to about helping me out with this and that? And that's been kind of a cool way to keep doing mission focused things without being like in the government or active duty military or anything like that. But it's still a pretty cool mission, all things considered.
As starting to wrap up a little bit, since this is a topic right now, I'd love to hear some of your impression of defense venture capital and this sort of emerging field where a lot of these like VC organizations are getting into defense tech. What are some of the trends that you see from where you are right now?
Yeah, so I will say, like, the time to get into like innovative tech is now, right? There's a lot of momentum behind getting not just new tech, but like also like the right tech, and like figuring out what that looks like into the hands of warfighters and doing it more quickly. Like, there's still a pretty big bureaucracy over at the Pentagon. There's still, entrenched interests in Congress. Like, those are things that you're just going to be up against, I think. There's also like the defense primes, right? And like I think a lot of people are anti-prime right now, and I would caution against that in some ways and say it's not that we should be against primes, because I think if we get into a major war, like the primes, they know how to deliver a lot of equipment
We just have
fast,
to
right?
diversify a bit.
And so we still need the primes. Like I think people like demonize them because like there's this whole thing now about like, oh, they've been getting all these lucrative contracts and they haven't innovated and everything else. There's probably some truth to that, but I think it's also because we've set up the wrong incentive structure within the government and like how we reward success, and we aren't making it easy for contracting officers to take risks. And so, when we have a system that rewards stagnation, you're going to get stagnation because that's what you've set up. And so I think the primes absolutely can innovate. They have innovated. They've developed some pretty cool things, but we just need a lot more people building a lot more cool things now, right? So we need to move away from just 4 or 5 defense primes. We really ideally should have like 20 or 25 defense primes. And if you look at the way things used to be done before the consolidations of the 90s, when we thought we were going to have world peace for forever after, we used to have a lot of companies producing a lot of things, right? And even during World War II, everybody was producing weapons. And so I don't know that we have to go back to that necessarily, but we do need a far more nimble, agile, and better resourced defense industrial base. And so there's a big push right now. You hear different terms. You hear reindustrialize. You hear defense tech innovation. But there's real push and real money behind that. I think what to give you a thought about like trends, I think what we need to see in the coming months and years now is like real production at scale and real return on venture investment in order to prove that system works. But I think that some of the things we're seeing now are setting the right conditions for that. And so I do think like we have to be cautious, right? Like I don't think we need to like cancel all these like programs unless we have a viable alternative. But there's no reason we can't like run fast, break things, and build things quickly too. Like we have to do all of those things. So where I see it, like there's a lot of chaos right now. But I think where a lot of people see chaos, like we see opportunity, and we see an opportunity for a lot of defense tech startups to get into the game right now and solve real problems that the military has been like begging for solutions for. But I think now we're seeing some of the and this, by the way, this didn't just start now. Like this trend has been underway for a while now. But you're starting to see that come to fruition. I think where those things are happening. And I think that, looking at what we've learned from the battlefields in Ukraine, there's a lot of cool companies being stood up here in the U.S. that are taking that and taking those lessons learned, providing it to our warfighters now. And I think we're going to see those innovations bear fruit. So yeah, I think it's a good environment, and I think the trends are positive. And so if you're out there and you're thinking about getting into defense tech and venture-backed companies, like there's really no better time than now to jump into that.
Do we have any questions for Nick? Oh, okay, no questions. Nick, thank you for spending your evening with us. Do you have anything you want to plug, or like where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's really like my only online presence.
Okay.
And I don't know if happy to put the link in the show notes or whatever, if that makes the most amount of sense. But yeah, that's really and it's just NIC Adams, Nick Adams. That's you'll probably find me. But yeah, I would just again, I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to have this conversation with or talk about all the cool things happening in the defense tech space as well. But yeah, if anyone's interested in having that discussion, happy to do it.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate your insights tonight. And everyone else, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. And we'll see all of you next time. Thank you. Hey guys, it's Jack. I just want to talk to you for a moment about how you can support the show if you've been watching it, enjoying it, but you'd like to get a little bit more involved and help us continue to do this. You can check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And for $5 a month, you can get access to all of these episodes of The Team House ad-free. The same goes with our affiliated podcast, Eyes On, with Andy Milburn, Jason Lyons, Mick Mulroy. That one, you will also get all of those episodes ad-free. And you support the channel and the show, and we really appreciate it. The Patreon members are literally what has helped this company, this small business survive, especially during our early years. And you are what continues to help this thing going, even as we navigate the turbulent world of YouTube advertising. So we really appreciate all of you guys. There's going to be a link down in the description to that Patreon page. And there is also going to be a link to our new merch shop. So if you guys want to go and get some Team House merchandise, we got stickers and we also have patches. And I should mention, if you sign up for Patreon at $10 a month, we will mail you this patch as well. So we really appreciate that. But they're also for sale on the merch shop. And additionally, they got t-shirts up there, water bottles, a tote bag, coffee mugs, all that good stuff. So please go and check them out and support the show. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.